Hi, grade 10s. We're starting off Unit 3, by our biology unit today with Introduction to the Cell. We are now done climate change. If you haven't noticed already on the frequently asked questions portion on Google Classroom, we will be doing a climate change test remotely. We'll be doing formal unit tests when we get back from our social distancing time and we're back in the classroom. So just make sure you've submitted those three activities from last week, activity 1, 2, and 3 from week 1, as I'll be using those in the meantime to gather data and assess your work. Also, a lot of you have been asking on our welcome back form last week about assessment. So yes, those activities that you are being assigned will be used for marks. Okay, I won't just be taking a look at their complete. I'll be looking at the quality of work. And over these next 4 weeks, I'll be looking at all of those activities that you are submitting, assigning a mark to them, and I'll be using that data to help determine what your final mark will be at the end of the course. Okay, so please make sure that you are completing those activities and completing those activities with the same time and care you would usually with your in-class work. Okay, so today we are taking a look at lesson 1, Introduction to the Cell, and we will be continuing on taking a look at biology for the rest of the week and for the next 2 weeks as well, so until we are back in school, hopefully on May 4th. So what are we going to be doing today? We're going to start by talking a little bit about the cell and microscopy. Then we're going to be looking specifically at the initial creation of the microscope and a famous scientist called Robert Hooke. We'll be looking at characteristic cells and types of cells, and you'll be finishing today's work on Explore Learning Gizmos, which we've used quite a bit before. You'll be looking at different parts of the cell, which should be a little bit of review from grade 7 or 8 science that you did back in elementary school. You'll be completing the gizmo and submitting that worksheet to me on Classroom. So by the end of the class today, what we should be able to do is discuss how cells are the basic unit of life, including some basic features and characteristics of cells, as also be able to properly use a microscope and identify plant and animal cells. Okay, so here's some pretty neat pictures of cells that you may see. These are in fact all pictures from the human body, and these aren't using light microscopes, the types of microscopes that we have access to at Tommy Douglas, but these would be using larger, more fancy things like scanning electron microscopes, but pretty cool to see really up close the different parts of your body. So up here, we actually have a picture of a blood clot. So if you've ever had a cut before and put pressure on it to sort of stop its bleeding, you can see these little round guys that kind of look like donuts. There's actually pictures of them down here as well. These are human red blood cells. These are the cells that help us carry oxygen around our body for us to survive. When you actually get a blood clot, these protein fibers come across and sort of act like a netting to keep your blood, because it's a really important resource for your body, inside your body instead of escaping. So pretty cool that we can see these cells so close. You can also see these kind of do look like a donut, and the oxygen atoms like to go right in the center here. And when you're healthy, they do look like these nice big plump donuts. But if you have something like sickle cell anemia or know someone who does, instead of looking like these nice, healthy donut looking cells, they actually look more like a half moon, sort of like a C. And they're not as good at transporting oxygen, and that's why people like that tend to feel more tired on a regular basis. These cells right here are the cells that are in your brain and your spinal cord. These are really specialized cells called neurons. They have this nice sort of webbing network between cells and cells, and each of those little pathways are a pathway where you learn something. So when you learn where to walk or how to talk, you create these new pathways through your neurons. And when you learn things, you're cementing these new pathways. Pretty cool. These cells are actually so specialized, they're the only cells in your body that can't reproduce, so they can't make copies of themselves. And that's why there's greater concern about brain and spinal cord injuries, because unlike when you cut your skin and your body can just grow new skin, if you do damage to your brain or your spinal cord, those cells can't be regrown or fixed in the same way the rest of our body can. Here we have a picture of the largest cell in the human body. This is actually an egg cell, sometimes called an oocyte, and these are where all of us began. So that's the egg cell that would have been produced in your mom, your biological mother, and when the sperm fertilizes that egg, it eventually turns into a zygote gamete and eventually a baby. So biggest cell in the human body. Over here, we have some pictures of what your intestines look like. These are actually pictures of microvilli. So your intestines are like a sponge, so all of the food that you eat can be absorbed. And so they have all these nice little hairs that sort of fan out and increase the surface area along your intestines to allow you to absorb food from your nutrients. Down here is this type of cell you wouldn't want to see in your body. This isn't part of a healthy human body. This is actually what cancer cells look like. And you can see that they're much less regular in shape or normal in shape, and they even look a lot more sickly because they're not following normal cell processes like the rest of our cells do. But pretty cool what we can see with microscopes, and pretty cool that in your body you have all these different types of cells that have all these different shapes and sizes and appearances. And that's because they all have different jobs. So the first scientist who ever described what a cell actually looked like was a man, Robert Hooke. Here's his picture right here. He created a publication called Micrographia, and in that he was the first person to coin the term cell, which means he was the first one to really describe what cells were and call them that. So he kind of gave the name cells to cells. So he was the first one to describe it. He actually got the names from looking at monasteries. So a monastery is kind of like a dorm room. There's small little rooms, one after another, after another, after another, all in a path. And each of those little rooms where they stay are called cells. And he thought it kind of looked like those little windows or those little units in monasteries. So that's why he first called them cells. So he was the first person to describe what a cell looked like in that publication Micrographia, but he actually was wrong with what he thought they did. He thought that the job of cells was just to pass fluids in plants, and he didn't think they had any other sort of function. He thought it was kind of like a highway or a road system. But he still is credited with being the first person to describe the cell and coin the term or come up with the term cell. If you want to learn a little bit more about Robert Hooke, I would highly recommend there's a video linked here. You can also, in our Need Any Extra Help tab on our weekly calendar, the very first link is called The Crazy History of the Cell Theory. It will tell you a little bit more about Robert Hooke, how he came up with those first microscopes, and a little bit more about his publication in Micrographia and how he described those first cells. So I'd really encourage you, after you see this video, to take a look at that. It'll help you understand why it was such a neat discovery at the time. So we know what cells are. What's the job of cells in our body? Well, cells make up everything in our body. So just like in chemistry, we've learned like the basic building blocks of matter or atoms, the basic building blocks of life are cells, okay? And for something to be considered a cell, it has to have these 4 key characteristics. So the first thing is they have to be able to take in nutrients from their environment. Second thing is they have to be able to release waste products, so things that they don't need anymore, into their environment. They need to be able to make copies of themselves, and they need to contain everything within them that they need to live and grow. Okay, so they need to have all of the equipment, everything they need inside the cell to be considered a cell. So those are the 4 key features that you have to display for something to be considered a cell, okay, versus a virus or something else. Okay? And like we said, the fact that cells are the basic unit of life is described as the cell theory, okay? So what the cell theory says is all organisms, anything that's alive, needs to be composed of at least one cell. Cells are the basic organizational structure of all living things. So it means everything that's alive is made of, if you break it down, from cells. And all cells need to come from pre-existing cells. So cells don't just spontaneously appear out of nowhere or disappear into nothingness. Okay, they come from a line of other cells. So cells are what produce more cells, which produce more cells. Okay. Picture here, just like we talked about before, of a less healthy red blood cell. So you can see this is actually what your red blood cells would look like if you have sickle cell anemia. They don't look like those nice donut shapes that we saw at the beginning of the slideshow. They're not quite as round. They look more like a half moon. Not quite as good at transporting oxygen around the body as well. Okay. One thing to keep in mind to connect us back to Unit 1 is note that cells are still made of matter. So cells are still made up of atoms, molecules, everything we learned about in Unit 1. but cells are the smallest unit of life. So we wouldn't call an atom alive, okay? It's just an atom. But when something is considered to be alive, it needs to at least be made of at least one cell, okay? Okay, two major types of cells that we need to be able to classify between are prokaryotic cells. So this word right here is pronounced prokaryotic, and eukaryotic cells, okay? So prokaryotic cells are simple cells, okay? They're what we think were the first types of cells that evolved, okay? So they're very simple. They lack cell structure and compartmentalization, okay? Which means inside the cell there's nothing. The cell is just like a little bag. Inside it, they don't have any organelles or special features or special structures. It's just sort of a small little bag, okay? Things or living things that are usually made of prokaryotic cells are almost always unicellular. So that means that they are life forms that are only made of one cell. So again, scientists, we know we're not super creative when we name things. Uni, usually meaning one, and cellular, cell. Okay, if an organism is unicellular, it's an organism just made of one cell. So the whole body of the organism is just one cell. Okay, so good examples of this would be like Streptococcus bacteria. That's the stuff if you've ever been unlucky enough to have strep throat before. That infection is caused by a unicellular bacteria. Okay, that's a prokaryotic cell. It doesn't have any cell structure or compartmentalization, and the whole organism is unicellular. Or amoeba. Those are other things that you can often see in like water samples. Again, don't have any cell structure, nothing special inside of them, and the amoeba are unicellular organisms. So these are the types of things you would only be able to see under a microscope, okay, for the most part. Eukaryotic cells are a little bit different. Like our bodies, for example, are made of eukaryotic cells. So these are cells that have extensive structure inside of them and are highly compartmentalized. So just like the school has different rooms that do special jobs. So the science lab looks a lot different than the gymnasium, looks a lot different than the library. They're all structured and are separated from one another because they all do their own jobs. If you need to do physical activity, you're going to go to the gym. If you need to do a science lab, you're going to go to science lab because we have all the equipment you need there. If you need to find a book, you're going to go to the library, a different part of the school because it does a different job, okay? Eukaryotic cells, same thing. They have like little rooms or little sections within the cell that all do their own jobs. You may remember from grade 7, 8 learning about things like the mitochondria or the nucleus or the Golgi apparatus. If you don't remember, that's fine. We're going to review it today. But they do have these special little spots within the cell that all have their own special job. So we say they're compartmentalized, okay? Commonly as well, organisms that are made of eukaryotic cells are much more complex and they're therefore multicellular. So organisms that are made of many cells. So we are considered multicellular. We're not just made of one cell. We have tons of skin cells and brain cells and muscle cells and bone cells, all of those different types of cells that make you up. Because we have more than one, we would be considered multicellular. So things like plants, like a fern, insects, or humans, or any other animal, we would all be made of eukaryotic cells. Okay, we have cells that are highly compartmentalized and specialized and structured, and we often are made of multicellular, or we often are multicellular organisms. There are some examples of prokaryotic organisms that are multicellular or eukaryotic organisms that are unicellular, but most often they follow these rules. Okay, two main types of eukaryotic cells that we're going to talk about that we should know the difference between are plant cells and animal cells. Okay? Now, animal cells are what you or and I or any animal, so any of your pets that you may have at home, fish, all that stuff, are made of animal cells. So there's a few key features of animal cells. And again, you're going to be reviewing this today in your gizmo. So if you're finding this confusing or going through it too fast, the gizmo will help. And again, make sure to reach out for me for extra help. Animal cells are often round or irregular in shape. A lot of times we'll call them fried egg cells because they kind of look like a fried egg, like it's either round or kind of lumpy in shape. They store energy as carbohydrates or fats. So for example, humans, we know that if we have extra energy, we store it in our body as fat. Animal cells do not have a cell wall. And we have some organelles present or absent that aren't present or absent in plant cells. So for example, in animal cells, we don't have a cell wall, we don't have chloroplasts, whereas they are present in plant cells. Also, the types of cells that we specialize into are different, and we're going to be talking more about that tomorrow, okay, or whenever you get to lesson 2. Plant cells, on the other hand, are often rectangular or regular in shape, so square or rectangles. They often are repeating. They store their energy as starch or oils. So when we think of a lot of plants that we eat, like starchy things that you may eat, you may think of things like potatoes or bread that's made of wheat. Okay, those are plants that store their energy as starch. Or you can think of oils, so things like avocado oil, coconut oil, olive oil, things that you may have in your kitchen. Those are good examples of plants that store their energy as oil instead. They do have a cell wall, and again, there's different internal organelles. You're going to review this in the gizmo, and they also have different specialized cells, and we're going to take a look at that in lesson 2. Okay. So pretty much what we said is everything that's living is made of cells, and there's 2 main types of cells. Prokaryotic cells, these are those simple cells that usually are only unicellular organisms. They don't have compartmentalization. And eukaryotic cells, okay, more complex cells have very extensive compartmentalization, okay, and often make things that are multicellular. So a good example of a prokaryotic cell would be strep throat bacteria. Eukaryotic cells we can also split into plant cells and animal cells. Okay, so plant cells we know have different features than animal cells. Anything that's a plant, like a cell from a rose petal, would be a plant cell, which would be a eukaryotic cell, which is still a cell. And animals, so things like the cells that make up your skin, okay, would be animal cells, eukaryotic and cells as well. So hopefully that helps you make a little sense of that. Okay. Another really good thing, if you're having a hard time sort of understanding the difference between what we talked about in Unit 1, so like cells, molecules, atoms, molecules, particles, and what we've been talking about today, cells. There's a really neat slide as well. This is also hyperlinked in your slides, as well as in that need any extra help portion. If you look at it, it's called size of the cell. It'll actually start you out by looking at like Times New Roman font, size of grain of rice and coffee bean. And you can continue to zoom in, zoom in, zoom in, zoom in to see the different sizes of different types of cells. And you can even zoom in to see sizes of things like atoms, just to get a perspective of the scale that we're talking about. Okay, so what we're going to end off with today, just to review a little bit of the difference between plants and animals and review the different parts of the cell. You're going to be looking at gizmos, so explore learning. So if you don't remember, okay, so when you go to your browser, remember we're going to go to explorelearning.com. This is linked for you in our slides and on your assignment on Google Classroom. You're going to log in, okay? You should be using your GAPS email and your password that you set up at the beginning of the year. It's likely the same as your GAPS email and your password that you use for school to get on the Wi-Fi. You're going to log in, okay? And when you go to our classroom, you're either in period 1 or period 2, you're going to open the cell structure gizmo and go through this gizmo using the handout also linked for you on our classroom site under lesson 1, activity 1 for this week. So if you click through here, you're going to launch the gizmo, okay, and go through the handout that's been provided to you. You'll be able to practice using a microscope to see the difference between animal cells and plant cells, okay, and you'll be able to also classify and identify and see the functions of the different components within the cell. Okay. If you have any trouble getting through the gizmo, let me know. Reach out via email, check my office hours, or you can post something on Classroom. Okay. So hope you're having a great day. Stay safe, stay home, stay healthy, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks so much. Have a good one, grade 10s.